Hi there, and welcome to 1080's Career Insights. I'm joined today by Trevor and David. We've noticed that more and more of our clients are thinking about self-employment. So one of the biggest concerns they seem to have is about how to win business, which is why we have our business experts here with us today. So as usual, please do like, comment and ask questions as we go, just to make it as interactive as possible. And before we actually start with the questions, we're going to just have a quick discussion about the differences between face-to-face relational and online transactional selling. So I can't remember who we agreed was going to start here. So let's go, Trevor.
I mean, there is a big difference, and we should sort of preface what we're saying by the fact that that if you're selling products, it's a very different thing from if you're selling consultancy services, relationships, and so on. One thing I would say in there, though, that whether you are predominantly involved in thinking about selling, something that's a service, or rather than a product, or vice versa, it's all shifting, in one direction. Is that even though we are, that you're probably more likely to sort of have a face-to-face discussion in terms of, as we all start to go back to the so-called normal, nevertheless, the direction, the mix of it will still be much more online mix, even after this pandemic has finally, hopefully, sort of behind us. So I think it's important to say that. I think a lot of models of buying and selling have shifted online, and they're not going to come back all the way. So even if you are selling services, consultancy, what have you, you need to think about this in terms of a mixed bag, if you like, of online and face-to-face. David, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Trevor said. I mean, we're all somewhere on this continuum, sort of the relationship transactional one. I don't think anyone's 100% at one end or at the other end. So we're all a different cocktail, if you like, of the two components. But I think the thing that underpins them both is the question of trust, in terms of you as the seller being able to build this rapport so that the other party believes that they can trust you to deliver what you're proposing in terms of service, or that your product delivers what you're promising on the tin. So that it's always about trust. So I think at the moment, this new kind of hybrid model that Trevor alluded to, I think we're all still learning about how can you best kind of build that rapport and trust when you're having to do it online as opposed to face to face. So I think it's a big challenge for everybody, including people who've been around the block a few times doing this.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bright side to this. It isn't what I found in my experience. So the pandemic has put us into this sort of massive experiment where we're doing a lot more sort of things online. And actually, I have found that not only have the models of selling changed, where certain things become more important. For example, speed of response. If somebody's emailing you about setting up a meeting, I think anything you can use in terms of technology, in terms of setting up meetings more quickly, basically creating an impression when you don't actually have that face-to-face meeting, they're sort of like sort of seeing the whites of somebody's eyes and so on. Anything around that you can do to improve your chances, I think is a really good thing. I think that's important. But the whole thing the one thing that we should say is that if you are able to create an environment of trust, you will be able to sort of increase your chances. And it's all about people knowing you, liking you, and trusting you. And that's the same online as much as it is offline. My own personal experience has been that actually it's opened up a lot of avenues, and that actually I'm now doing business with people in Australia, sort of Asia, over in America, that I wouldn't have met in any way. So actually it's creating that there are difficulties in selling online, but there's also a lot of benefits in terms of an expansion of the market, finding the people that you want to work with, but in different places to maybe London and the Southeast where I am. So.
Yeah,
I think also you have to have a more situational approach, in that it's not one size fits all. There's a difference between in terms of trying to build a relationship with somebody on a one-to-one basis, and having a whole bunch of people on the other end of a Zoom call, for example.
Yeah.
You have to behave differently if you're going to get the best out of that opportunity. So learning what works and what doesn't, and having the courage to stop doing something or start doing something is quite important.
Yeah, I've just been reading a book by a guy on LinkedIn called John Espirian. His book's Content DNA, and he was talking in there about online, offline kind of relationships, and actually building your relationship online, but making sure you're still being you, so that when you actually meet face to face, that the person kind of recognizes you from the online presence you've built. I think that's really interesting, actually, because I think it can be easy for some people to maybe be much more extroverted on social media than they actually are in real life, as a for instance. So I think that's quite a good point, just thinking about the balance there.
Yeah, that's right. It has to be genuine, authentic. You don't want to be the equivalent of online dating, where you turn up and they're not at all as advertised.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And picking up on your point about tech there, Trevor, I think that's true. We talked about this yesterday, didn't we? And I've been talking about kind of online calendars and whether it's a bit presumptuous to send people a link to book in time in your diary, or if that's okay. So do you want to expand a little bit on what you were saying yesterday?
About
using sort of the calendar technology, for instance. Is it good to set that up?
So one piece of software, for example, is Calendly, whereby you basically open up your diary to the software, and then the person who's coming in to look at it can select an appointment at their time of choosing. And I think you and I sort of have had a debate about this before, Sarah, in terms of when is it a bit presumptuous to just kind of plonk your sort of link to that to your diary in there. And I think when you haven't actually agreed to have a meeting, I think I think it is presumptuous, and it's not something I would do. But when, for example, you're in a situation where you've thought, well, actually it'd be really great to have a you've agreed that it would be great to have a conversation, then I can't begin to tell you how much time it actually saves you actually sort of opening up your calendar if you can be fairly clear on what's coming up. And it basically the technology allows you to mix and match all your sort of various diaries that we all have these days. And it's a great piece of software. I'm not here to sell that specifically, others are available, but I would say that any use of technology, once you've made that initial contact, is actually an aid to the trust process rather than a hindrance to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let's get on to the questions then. So what I've done here is to kind of ask the question, and then I've got a few summary points which we're going to talk through. So getting clients seems to be the thing that people worry about when they're setting up. What are the main concerns, and what advice do you have for each point? So the first one was, will the fish bite, i.e. is this a good idea? So David, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think this is quite important in that you have a degree of clarity about what it is that you're proposing to sell and who it's for, and that it's something that they need. Over the last 20 years, I've come across a lot of people who actually come up with a business idea, which is a solution that's got to go find a problem rather than the other way around. And that is always, it's almost like you're launching a business with a fatal flaw in it. So you want to avoid that. So doing your homework and satisfying yourself that there are sufficient people out there who would be prepared to pay for what it is that you are going to offer. And that's almost like a first step before you get involved in anything else about planning, coming up with your go-to-market plan. So are there enough people out there who have a need for what it is I'm going to offer? As opposed to me having to kind of create that need. The only person I can think on who's been successful in persuading a market they need something is Steve Jobs. But he's the exception that proves the rule. So I think this will the fish bite is a really important question to ask yourself before you even start.
Yeah, and this is all about, in a marketing sense, what are what we call your avatars? What are the people actually sort of look like? And sometimes it's a good idea to sort of try and imagine, sort of give them a name, give them a sort of what would typically be coming from, or what they would typically be interested in. What are their professional and personal sort of concerns? So yes, you're stereotyping in doing that, but it gives you something to work around in trying to imagine that person. Maybe you don't have to imagine that person, because you might know some of those people already, and they may have said, yes, we're interested in buying your services. I'd say that there's also other things that you need to ask, when you're asking, will the fish bite, is can you think of people you've worked with in the past, even if it's not in your own business, who were potential candidates, and what was it that you liked about working, and what were their needs and what were their concerns? David says the kind of number one issue around that is around people think they're segmenting, but perhaps they're not really segmenting enough when push comes to shove. That they're not ruthlessly sort of pursuing the type of target market. In my case, for example, it's marketing directors in business to business organizations who I'm targeting with my sort of day job business of content. And by not focusing clearly enough, you risk actually diluting what you're offering, because then you start to offer all things to end. That your fish may bite, but it might not necessarily bite on the bait that you wanted to offer in the first place.
Excellent. I think that leads us quite nicely into the attributes of a good salesperson. So, David, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah. Okay. I think this is quite important. In the past, I've run a series of kind of sales workshops, and one of the things I do is a word association test, and I ask people to do like the psychiatrist couch thing, which I'm going to say one word and you say the first thing that comes into your head. And so the word I say is salesperson, and then they all frown and scribble something down. Not many of the words are complimentary, and I won't repeat them on air, because the majority of people, there's always exceptions, associate sales with people they've come across as a consumer, and that they would cheerfully punch in the throat. So that conditions their thinking on what sales is all about. So the big conundrum is, how can I be successful at sales when I associate with people who I don't think are like me and I don't like? And the top, if you take as a given that you need to understand stuff about whatever your product or service is, the top three attributes, I think, and I've done quite a lot of research on this and asked a lot of people. Number one is the ability to be liked. And again, think about it from your own experience. You're more likely to buy from somebody you think you like and who kind of understands you, and so on. The second one is having the ability to listen, and listen authentically. We've already touched on being authentic, but I think authentic listening is really important. So that you're genuinely sort of in the room, whether it's a real room or a virtual room, with them, and you're not fretting about the meeting that you had before this one, which didn't go so well, or the phone call you've got to make after this meeting's finished. So you're genuinely listening to them, and feeding back to them. You've understood kind of what their expectations are and what their needs and wants are, and so on. And you avoid the risk of diving in enthusiastically to sell what you've got before you've heard their story and figured out whether it's relevant. So that ability to listen authentically is important. And the third one is equally important, and that's having the ability to enter their world rather than try to drag them into yours. So you have to try to get to understand the world in which they operate, the way things work, where their challenges are, and so on, rather than trying to pull them into your world and tell them how great your product is. That maybe comes later, but the first thing is to understand them, because hard though it may be for us as humans to take this, it's all about them and it's not about us. So that ability to enter the client's world is the top three I would come up with, Sarah.
And can I, just to build on that, I've got a sort of personal anecdote, if you like, is that I used to be a magazine editor, and I thought I was a good listener, but what I'd been listening to was the sort of the headlines, the headline that I wanted to write about something, and that's the equivalent of making something, fitting something to your world rather than to the other person's world. When I then moved into consultancy, I went for lunch with somebody who'd previously been trying to get into into our magazine, and I had only had one model of a salesperson at that point, and that was as an advertising salesperson, some people selling the space in the magazines that I used to edit. And so I started to behave in a certain way when I was talking to that person, because that was my model of what I thought a salesperson was supposed to do. And I was selling consultancy, but I was acting as if I was selling page space. And the person I knew, who knew me quite well, said, "Stop me." And so, Trevor, what are you doing? And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "But you're talking to me like a completely different person. I used to kind of really like you because you actually used to really listen to what I was saying, and you asked me a lot of questions. And I was going, oh, right, okay. He said, just be yourself, just be authentic, and you will sell through the knowledge you have and your ability to understand what it's like to be in my world, just as David said. So I learned a great lesson from there. I'm not saying I cracked it or anything, but certainly it was a kind of one of those light bulb moments for me personally.
Yeah, I guess it's about being comfortable, isn't it? So if you're being much more like yourself, you're going to be more comfortable and therefore much more likely to make the sale. I just saw a really good quote. I can't remember exactly what it said now on LinkedIn a few minutes ago. And it said something like, don't be their confident, be your confident. So i.e. don't compare yourself to other people's confidence, because it's going to be different for each person. I thought that's quite nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so pricing structure, I think this seems to be a big issue when people are first setting out on how they kind of price themselves. So any tips or advice on that, David?
Okay, yeah, this is a bit of a tricky one. I think the first thing, which may sound like a statement of the obvious, is that you really have to understand the financial drivers in your business, and particularly the costs. And again, I've come across people that I've had to explain that because of the model they've got, the more they sell, the more money they'll lose, because the costs of them taking their product to market outweigh the revenue that they can charge for it. So making sure that at the very basic level, you can, the model is sustainable in that you can sell it for more than it costs you to deliver it. And so I think that's the starting point. And then in terms of looking at what else is going on out there, I think it's very dangerous to come in at a low price in the expectation that you can win business, because whether you win business or not, you'll find it really difficult to increase your price having done that, because the market expectation will be that that's the level you operate at. On top of that, it can backfire in that if that's all you're charging, are you actually any good? So you need to be reassuringly expensive. But I think price integrity is very, very important. But that doesn't mean that you can't. People love a deal. You can come up with some deals. Something I've seen a lot in the States is what they call the early adopter deal, where somebody starts up and people know you're new, you're a new kid on the block, and that maybe for the first 10 clients, you offer them a price below what the commercial rate is. So you're making clear what your commercial rate is, but you're giving early adopters effectively a promotional bonus by signing up. And in exchange for which, if they're happy with your service or product, that they're going to post some kind of positive kind of reference or testimonial for you. So that's kind of one way of doing it. I've seen people be quite successful at, if it's some kind of training event they're running and they're pitching it to companies or businesses as well as to individuals, that the commercial rate is X, but if you come with more than one person, the second person comes at X minus 20% or something. So you're giving them an incentive to bring more people. And then there's also value-based pricing, and this is where you get away from being trapped in like a day rate equivalent or a fixed fee. And I'll tell you a story very, very quickly about somebody I know who was an expert in business process reengineering. He went in to do some work at a manufacturing company. He estimated that it was all in all about kind of 4 days work doing prep, being on site, and then writing up a report with some recommendations. And he charged the company £1,000 a day. So they were happy with what he did, and they paid him £4,000. He was very happy. A year later, the finance director invited him to dinner, and he and the CEO just wanted to thank him for the work he'd done, because in the first 12 months, he had actually saved them in terms of cost, £750,000, which the reward was for. And, he was really down and out at the result of this in terms of what he'd given away. So if you can build a performance kicker in, so that if you are actually good at what you do, then you get a degree of reward for that, then that's what they're thinking about.
All of the above, plus, I'd say that this value thing is essential. I come from an industry where, a lot of people write in terms of, rates per 1,000 words and so on. And, and I would advise anybody, whether they are selling words or whatever they're selling, not to think in terms of their inputs so much, but to be actually thinking about the value that what you're doing brings. I wrote a thought leadership paper for a client, and they were happy with it, and they kind of recommissioned me for several more papers. And at the time, I wasn't clear on the value that it had brought them, but they seemed happy enough. But then I actually plucked up the courage to ask them about what the value, and they actually were sort of saying, well, actually, it's opened. Okay, we didn't get much out in terms of PR terms, but and things like that. But the number of doors that this has opened, in terms of the value it's created, it's great. So always think in terms of the value. Part of that value that you may not appreciate, but you can get to by sort of good questioning, the way we talked about, is just like trying to establish in terms of the client's needs about what's the cost of them not doing something. That sometimes there's like a legal imperative, like there's a new law coming in and we've got to change something, and that therefore, I need this product or this service. Sometimes it's less sort of in to a clear date, but it might be that there's an urgency, like I can see the competition is doing these other things and we're not doing what they're doing and we're going to fall behind. All of these things, if you can show an understanding of that all helps in terms of your pricing structure. I'd also say there's an inbuilt tendency in most of us to undervalue what they do, and if you're going to err on one side, I'd err on the side of being slightly uncomfortable in what you're charging. Because you can, and I would say not negotiate on price, but you can negotiate on time, the amount of time you put into a project. If you set a line of your price, even if you don't sell as much as you want, it at least gives you more time to go out and find more similar people, rather than being sucked into a low cost world where you'll just be forever chasing your tail, providing low value work and not having time to look for any more work.
One other option, which is I've seen work quite well. I had a very funny conversation with the lady who was one of the founders of the company that kind of created and run my website, and I was thinking at the time of coming up with in Olympic terms, a gold, silver, bronze tariff. So bronze was, subscribe to my newsletter for free, and you can get my kind of weekly top tips and hints with my compliments. Particularly at the moment about putting together a good business plan. If you've done a business plan and you want me to stress test it, that's the silver tariff, so that costs money. If you want me to help you write it, that's the gold tariff, because that's going to take more input. And she laughed because at the very same time, and this is when social media was very new, she said, subscribe to my newsletter for free and you can get my weekly tips on social media strategies. If you want me to stress test your social media strategy, that's the silver tariff. And if you want me to help you write one, then that's the gold tariff. So we were both thinking exactly the same idea at the same time. So again, it's worth coming up with something where you're giving people choices, and people like choices because it increases the likelihood they'll pick one of them. So
that's a really good point. And I think also don't forget about asking other people for advice on pricing. I think I was asked to do a proposal for an engagement survey a couple of years ago now, and I thought that I'd priced it quite well, but I got turned down because they said it was too cheap and they weren't convinced the quality would be good enough with that work. And had I asked other people, then and it's that uncomfortable feeling, isn't it? I felt uncomfortable asking for what I had, but it still wasn't enough for this organisation. So definitely, if I'd have asked around a bit, I'm sure I would have been told to pitch a bit higher.
Yeah.
And you can do that really easily now. I think you can definitely find things on LinkedIn of what people charge, and obviously using your own network.
It's never been easier in that respect. So certainly there is a lot of transparency, but if you can't find what you want, then I'm amazed how willing people are to actually share, what they know. In many cases. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so how to actually find your clients. So Trevor, do you want to start with this one?
Right. In terms of finding clients, I mean, I think you have to start. We've touched on it before in terms of your avatar, of who you're actually talking to, who you're actually looking at targeting. In my case, as I said, it's business to business marketing directors. And what I do is I resist any temptation to sort of move beyond that, and what, if anything, I will narrow it down to business marketing directors in Australia for some reason. We're coming to a summer period, for example, at the moment, and a lot of people say, oh, it's all a bit quiet at the moment, isn't it? And nothing's sort of happening in summer. Not in Australia. They're having their winter. They're busy. They're not on their summer holidays. So why not, for just as an example, be targeting those people? So you sort of niche it down, and then you look at the specific issues that they might be facing, and that you read around the system, and then you have to develop a sort of system, in terms of how you then do that. What I do is, as I'm building prospects, I ascribe a percentage chance of this prospect coming through, and what I think the value could be, and when it's likely to come through. And by then I've got a sort of multiple. So 80% of, say, 10,000, is 8,000, and I think there might be 8,000. That's worth more to me than a prospect that might be worth 100,000, if you like, but there's actually only a 1% chance of coming through. And, so I have to, you have to look at these things and actually rationally think, how am I going to allocate my time in following up these clients? So you've got a list. You also have to be you do actually have to be quite systematic in when you are going back. But I would go back with the philosophy of getting them to know, like, and trust you. Not necessarily, in my world at least, which is a sort of largely a consultancy sale, not necessarily sharing things with them, building up that trust. Particularly if you're in an online environment, the trust thing is increasingly important when they've got no sort of visual, sort of face-to-face rather signals at all. So be systematic. Share things with them. In my business, then what I do is I increase, therefore, the chances that the phone will ring or the email will ping. But I don't necessarily have any control over when that will happen. But I do increase the chances that it will.
David, anything to add to
that? Yeah, I mean, something when I was setting out, something that I found quite useful was firstly getting onto the networking circuit, which was quite a good way of getting the word out there. Because at the time, I'm so old, at the time I started, LinkedIn had only just been created. But what I found worked really well, and I got an opportunity to observe other people in terms of what worked and what didn't, was actually coming up with a statement which was in the third person, so it didn't sound like I was talking to them and saying, you need my help. Nobody's I'm a business mentor. Nobody's in the shower in the morning thinking, I need a damn good dose of mentoring. Something happens to trigger it. So trying to unlock what that is quite important. But again, I did some research, and I came up with a sentence which I used to use in several different ways, which is, people tend to contact me when, was the first part of it. And the second part of the sentence was, when they are working far too hard and not making enough money. Because the two biggest challenge for the startup is normally exactly that. They're working far too hard and not making enough money. So you can then flip that around and say, I help people make more money and free up their time, because that's exactly what I do. And so, but if you say it in the third person, it doesn't sound like a direct attack on them. But their antenna goes up, and you can tell. And afterwards, they're likely to come up to you and say, oh, can we get together for coffee and a chat or something? And then you're away. So finding a way to explain why people would ever want to reach out to you, in terms of what it is you're offering, is quite important.
Yeah, there's a building on that, that you can almost then go on and apply a formula or like a product or service promise, where you say this product or service, takes who, so a specific bunch of people or an avatar from a problem to an outcome. And if you want to, you can add a sentence about how it does this, particularly if it's a unique way of doing it that other people aren't doing, or very few people, and what makes it different. But just think about that. So this thing takes you, the person that I'm talking to, from this problem to this outcome, and just something as simple as that, without actually having to sell the features of what it is that you're selling. You're actually selling straight away the benefits of it, and that makes a huge difference. Then people go, oh yeah, okay, well tell me more about that, rather than being drowned in detail. People are not going to be impressed by the detail of your offering, but then will be impressed by the value that it brings and the difference that it makes to their lives.
Excellent. So very quick last question, quick points on how to convert conversations into paid business. So preconditions for getting a sale, asking for the business, adaptive sales techniques. So I just wanted to mention very quickly, there's a guy on LinkedIn called The Piano Guy. It's actually called Mark Deeks. And he was doing a challenge for 5 days, 15 minutes a day for 5 days, and you'll be able to play something on the piano by the end of the week. So I did this. And then he then phoned me and said, do you want to do my 90-day challenge? And of course I was like, yeah, okay. So I bought that because he phoned me. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. So I think that's a really good point, to have the confidence to actually phone people, because people rarely do that these days, I think. But anyway, comments on this particular converting conversations into business, David?
Goodness, there's quite a lot here. I think
there is. So
I think some of this could be a teaser for a prequel, I think.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
The right way around. Okay, just at the very high level, it's really worth understanding what are the things that need to be happening in the other party's world for you to get the sale, because if those preconditions aren't met, it isn't going to happen. So I'm just going to give you one, because there's 6 of them. And the one I'm going to give you is the fact that there may be other stakeholders in the business beyond the person you're talking to. And can you establish that they're all aligned in terms of the course of action that they all favor is buying from you? Because if they aren't all aligned, there's a huge risk it's never going to happen, even if you're having great conversations with the person you're talking to. So really thinking through what's got to happen client side for me to get the deal.
Adding to that sort of preconditions getting a sale, that if that person is not necessarily the person that needs to be convinced, you can actually work with that person, the initial contact, to say, how can I help you convince the CEO or the whoever, that is the things. You have to be prepared to actually do that, a little bit of extra work and consultation, if you like, in terms of helping them sell. Because part of what they're doing is, will it make a difference to the business? And part of it is, how will it make me look within the business for me trying to sell this? So that's one of those. I'd say, picking up the phone sometimes is almost like shocks people that you will pick up the phone.
Definitely.
But if you're not, but I'd also just finally say, have I got time to add one more thing, Sarah?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I would say that there is a real kind of mental block with many people around when people don't get back to you when you've made a proposal. You send in a proposal, you don't hear anything back. You think lots of things. All of them negative, like they don't like my proposal, it costs too much. They don't like me. They don't, something, that would be there to sort of a kind of gloomy justification as to why that person is not going back to you. I would say that not always, but almost always, the reason people don't get back to you is not the reason that you think. It's if you think about your own world, you're busy with stuff, that you might have seen this and thought, oh, that looks interesting, or that's reasonably priced, or but you actually don't get back to the person because you've got several things going on. So what you have to do is to keep the communication going somewhere. Sometimes you finish an email, for example, with a question like, would you like to meet, or shall we follow up and have another discussion? And to give them a sort of a nudge if you're going along, just a very polite sort of thing. If they continue not to get back to you, then I would say just, again, it doesn't mean they don't like what you're doing, but just lay off for a bit, and because there's a reason they're not getting back. But it might be they're just waiting for the budget to come through, or there might be all sorts of reasons. Don't give up in those situations or write them off, because it can sometimes it's not the reason you think. That there's a number of competing concerns in their lives, just as there is in yours.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. So we did say yesterday that we've probably got enough content for a week. We've arranged another session for the 20th of October. So we will kind of continue them with some other questions as well. But in the meantime, if we can just leave with a top tip. So David.
I think my top tip would be around sales qualification, which is how you turn the process is how do you turn a stranger into cash in the bank. And I think that there's a two-way process, and a lot of people don't realize it's a two-way process. The other party is trying to make up their mind. Do they want to buy from you, But at the same time, I think it's important that you spend a bit of time thinking, do I want them as a client? Because there's a very well-known phrase now, which is not every client is a good client. And if you pick a wrong one, they can be real kind of, not only can they be a financial risk, but they can sap your energy and your inner strength. So making sure that you're not getting so desperate that you're doing business with anyone, that you have kind of client acquisition standards where you're making a decision in the same way that the other party's making a decision on whether they want you as the provider.
100% agree with that. I probably would have chosen that as well, but I'll choose a different one, which is about segmentation and avatars, that less really is more. If you're very clear about who you are targeting, everything else can fall into place. It's a sort of precondition. So if you're very clear that the target is a particular person in a particular industry of a certain size, then you can focus on, maybe there's only 10 of them, in that situation, but that is better than having 10,000, who you're very vague about, who you're not quite sure what their needs are. You've got 10 people who have the same kind of problem, then you've got a chance of winning maybe 2 or 3 of them, and then that's job done.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all the advice. Next week, I am back talking about job seeking again next week. So Michael and Jill will be attending, and we're going to be talking about unexpected ways to get a job. So I know Michael has a few stories there, so look forward to that. So thanks again for joining. I can see that people have been watching for the whole time. No one's dropped off, so that's been really great. So obviously you've been so interested that there's been no questions because they're just engrossed. So if you do have any questions later, please do feel free to ask them, and we will look at answering them. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week. See you. Bye.
Bye.